So, welcome Henrik Engström, a professor from Skövde University. Henrik has come to us here at Stockholm University to our game research seminar, and he will tell us about game development research in the wild, and also about his new book. So, welcome, Henrik.
Thank you. Yeah, and I will talk about the book, but I will also start to talk a little bit about myself and my background and the environment we have in SKÖVDE, and the research I've made that led up to this. And then I will talk a bit about the relation between game educations and research, and also about the relation between game research and game development in the wild. So, start with myself. I'm from SWEDISH originally, which is not too far away from here. Started in the 60s and learned how to use a hammer, at least in the SWEDISH. But then I moved to Mariestad in Västergötland. And there I saw my first computer. I think it was late 70s when I went to this shop here, Norlander's TV shop in Mariestad, and they had a section with computers, and I was instantly amazed. And then me and my brother had an Atari 2700 video game, and I went to the video game store and saw that they had programming cartridge, and then I thought, yeah, this is the thing. So I bought it and went home and realized it's impossible to make anything with this. I wanted to make games, but it was too small, too little memory space for it. So I returned it, and then I bought a new home computer. I started to make games. And then I went to Uppsala for my studied computer science and mathematics. And then I returned to Västergötland, and yeah, I made some games on Mac at that time. I bought an Apple computer. And then from one old military base to another, to SKÖVDE, I started in '96 as a teacher. And they were quite heavily into like business systems and accounting and such. But I thought it was quite boring to teach programming in that way. So I started to introduce game programming in the courses I taught. This is of course I had in object-oriented programming. It's not much of a game. It's you feed a fish, and if you feed it much, it gets kids, and if you don't feed it, it dies. And they were supposed to do like inherited versions of the fishes, different kinds in this exercise. But I enjoyed teaching game programming at that time, so I suggested to our head of department that why can't we have like programs in game development? And that idea was liked by some, but not all. So it took some time before we realized it. But in 2002 we got the game educations in SKÖVDE. And it has grown since then. So now we are 8 undergraduate programs, 2D art, 3D art, animation, sound, audio, design, game writing, and programming. And 4 graduate programs. And we also have PhD students, but not a specific games program for PhDs. So somewhere around 600 students in games in SKÖVDE. And students soon started to start companies, and we have a game incubator that is quite successful, and the municipality has been supportive. So we have created this what we call Sweden Game Arena, which is the whole ecosystem in games in this small. SKÖVDE is like 60,000 citizens. So before we started the game educations, there were no game companies in SKÖVDE at all. Now we have a lot, and the most recent success is the Valheim game. And I don't remember the numbers, but the tax income from Valheim like finance everything here for many years.
Wow.
So it's a good strategy. That's been a good strategy for the area. And University of SKÖVDE is a högskola, and we are not supposed to do research a lot. We don't get a lot of funding for that. We are mainly there to have educations, but we still have some research. And in games, we have some focus on game development, the things I will talk more about. Some PhD students doing things related to that. We've been doing a lot of serious games, and we have researchers more into the artistic and narrative and cultural heritage aspects of gaming as well. But myself, the first game research I did was in 2001, when me and the current Vice Chancellor sat in the coffee room, and I had just had a class students where they should make an introductory assignment to make a rock, paper, scissors game. And we've been talking about, like, this is not a random game. You use strategies in it. And I had some idea that I think male players start with rock because it feels more powerful and you could counterattack and so on. So we talked about that. And then he was doing neural network AI. And he was, yeah, I think we can make an AI for this. So he made the AI and I made a WAP mobile player. This was long before the real mobile games. So we had a WAP server playing with this neural network, and people were playing, and we did some studies of the strategies people used. And yeah, so that was my first game related publication. Then we started to do research that had some connection to simulation training. This is a picture from our firefighter training that was based on Half-Life 2 mod in a cave. That we did together with the Swedish Rescue Service schools. And this is a stroke rehabilitation game console that we developed. We built the whole thing, and patients got it in their homes to do motoric rehabilitation through playing games. And the motion controller is from a golf game. It's called Game Track. So we done things like this, and in 2016, prior master students were really into audio-based games, and we got a project where we made a point-and-click adventure game that could be played both with and without visual cues, and that led us to present at the Game Developers Conference in 2016. And it also led us to TRANSMEDIA production project we did together with the Swedish radio, where we took this concept and made a game to the Christmas calendar for the Swedish radio. And there I was involved in many ways, but I was more or less the only programmer. So I developed both game part and tool parts, and the tool parts I wanted to say a few more words about, because I think I will come back to it. This is a tool I developed in these projects for making originally for the game writer to write the dialogue and have it connected to the game engine. So, but eventually we made it to be like the level editor for the design and writing, and you use it as visual scripting tool. You can model the flow of the dialogues. It's quite standard in many ways, but we had originally a very strong idea that should be easy to use for people with very little programming background. And if you want to try it out, it's available at daig.se. It's called Daig. But when we did this TRANSMEDIA project, we got some challenges, because the Swedish radio hired the writers, and one of the writers were really skeptical towards using a tool like this. And when I asked what do you want to use, the answer was some writing tool, like script writing tool, Final Draft. And these tools are not made for interactive writing. It's like linear writing. But I took this a little bit as a challenge, and I made a writing companion to this Dave tool. And the idea I had was that if you take a playthrough of the game, you get an instantiated narrative that could be worked on. You can't change the branching. You can just see that instance. But in the tool, it shows the branching, and you can play test in it. So it looks something like this. It's inspired by this Final Draft structure. So you get it as a text, and then you can write dialogue in the non-interactive parts and add dialogue. But as you can see here, this was the consequence of a dialogue choice. You have please or I will quit, and this is what we see here is the please dialogue. So once you've written it, you can place it from that place in the sequence. So then you get instantly to that place, and you can see how it works. And we worked a lot as we work with the people with visual impairment. We used the text-to-speech a lot in this process. So now I don't have the dialogue here, but you get to hear it as well, which can be a valuable thing when you write, if you hear it play out. So here is an example of the I quit. So then you get a special place where this is the alternative. And it says, if you shows this chapter ends. So this tool was deliberately made for this person who didn't want to work with the other things. And once we finished, we did interviews, and this was comments from that person. It worked really well. I found it to be very clear. It was a big difference compared to the start when we looked. And there were nodes here and there and different commands, which made me feel a bit terrified. Also because I'm a person that hates Excel and formulas and such things. I also felt that if the tool was very user-friendly, it feels like a thing you should get patented and sell at a high price because it was so good. So that made me really happy. And I think it's interesting because it shows that people are not the same. There are different types of brains involved in game productions. In this case, maybe this person was not a game developer, but more a writer. But I think the same challenges can be found in other in traditional game development. But another part I've been working on is literature reviews on game research, and that brought me to this point with the book. And this relates to our educations and how we combine this with research. And I will talk about our environment in SKÖVDE. I don't know if you suffer from the same things, but this is how I interpret our situation. I think we get students who wants to go to the industry. They see university as something in between that would get them to industry. Most students, not all, but most. And then the university will provide them with some skills. And maybe they heard about research, but really that's not the main focus. Our university view is more like this. That's research is the basis for everything, and then maybe we should have some applied things, proven experience and applied things. And yes, they will go to some industry down the lane, but the important thing is what we do. And in our university, we have a tendency that the applied stuff is adjuncts, and the research are professors or senior lecturers and so on. And what we struggle with, the University of SKÖVDE, is that we have master's degrees, bachelor degrees. It's not a professional qualification degree. It's not civil engineer or nurse. But when we promote our educations, we say that we talk about the job opportunities, and the students come to us because they want a job, and they expect to learn how to make games. And if we look at the laws in Sweden, it says that course and study programs based on scholarship and artistic practice, or artistic practice and on proven experience. So we have this proven experience and scholarship there. And I think we have a challenge in games, because if we talk about some other educations like healthcare teachers and engineers, they have more clear academic homes that are connected to them. But in games, we don't have one academic home. It's not only game studies. I think maybe some game studies scholars would hope for it to be so, but I don't think it's like that. And it's not only IT technology, and it's not only art. And maybe this is like obvious to a researcher, but I think for the general public, we have a very vague perception of what is research. People trust researchers. The general public think researchers stand for the truth, but I would say that there are many researchers, I don't know if it's a word even, like we have incompatible paradigms that are here in the same building. And if we look, I'm not a theorist on the research philosophy, but I mean, on the bottom line, there are assumptions that you either believe in or not believe in. And it's a little bit like religion, which is ironic to many people. So what we tend to do is that we have the proven experience, the applied stuff going up here in a separate lane, and then we take the students along one route in the other lane, the research lane, where we pick one paradigm or some other. Okay? And in contrast, in a game studio, it looks a little bit like this. That we have those people coming from different places, making a game together. And they have to. They have to in some way sort differences out. And a very important person in this is the producer. Then when people talk about producers, it's common that the people skills are the most important thing, to be able to understand the differences and to negotiate and find solutions. So in academia, we have a quite different system where we encourage people to go deep into one discipline, and we are not forced to handle many different paradigms. We can do a research career and be positivists from day one till we retire. It's fully possible. And if we do interdisciplinary stuff, it's mainly to write together. And that is not as hard to understand. I mean, we share that. If we would write together, we know what writing is about. It's not something completely different. But in a game dev team, the animator can have hard problems understanding what the writer is doing or the programmer is doing, because they do completely different stuff. And I think, for us, at least, the researchers in general, there are few that have been part of an interdisciplinary team and have experienced the depth of differences that we can experience. And if people, in many cases, those that have that experience many times have these low, less academically ranked roles that adjuncts. And in discussions, it's hard for adjuncts to tell professors what is the best way to do this. I don't know if you experience the same here. We have this very hierarchical system, which makes this experience, that is maybe the most important experience in the teacher groups that have the least say when programs are designed and so on. So what we do in many cases is that we focus the teaching on the single perspective results, and then we leave it for students as an exercise to understand this once they get out there, which I think is a problem. I don't think we can revolutionize academia, but at least I think it's important to have something that points to the middle, saying there are challenges here that you will face. So that's where this book comes in. After teaching game students for almost 20 years and fighting with colleagues. So that comes to the next step, the game research we do, and the connection to actual game development. So the aim with the book was to try to highlight this breadth I talked about, and maybe to help students. And I've tried it out on one class this year, and I was really happy to see some of the more traditional programming types don't understanding what the big thing was, realizing, yeah, maybe I've been a little bit narrow-sighted there, and going into looking at art disciplines and things like that. And yeah, I was happy to see that result at least. And then I want to show what kind of results are there out there in the research literature. I mean, we need to base our practice on research, so we could at least pick up the parts. If you just go out and search on the Google Scholar as a student, you're unlikely to find anything that you feel is relevant for applied game development, unfortunately. And when I've been teaching, I've been struggling, and then I once found this MIT Media Lab researcher, Neri Oxman. Have you heard of her? I think she's originally a medical doctor and an architect, some kind of super person, and a soldier as well. And she presented this Krebs cycle of creativity as some kind of inspiration for creative work, and to acknowledge that there are the creative activities happens in different areas, and they nourish each other. So we have, I think we have it. Yeah, it fits game development very well, and it's very interesting to see that it also follows the history of game research well. So we have the science, engineering, design, and art, and these are the four big modalities for creativity according to her. And the left and the right part is separated as nature and culture, and the upper and lower part is production perception. And then there's a lot in it, and I think she talks about that 12 o'clock Einstein meets Picasso or something like that, or Picasso meets Einstein, yeah, I think this it covers a lot of the stuff that are interesting to cover when we talk about games. So science and games. The role of science is to explain and predict the world around us. It converts information into knowledge. And here the game research started, and one little important person here is Alan Turing. He wrote a paper 53 called "Digital Computers Applied to Games." Have you seen it?
Yes.
It's AI.
Yes.
It's really fascinating that he was clearly a scientist, but he also had a very open mind. So he had a list of questions that you can ask. When one is asked, could one make a machine to play chess? There are several possible meanings which might be given to the words. Here are a few. And then he puts up the interpretation of this. And one of the fun things is that the last bullet is, can we make a machine that have the same feelings when they play chess as you and I? And I think it's interesting because it's quite unique to talk about gameplay and feelings at this stage. And then it's also fun that he says, no, I don't think so. And the argument, not more than I can never know if you feel the same as I do. So, so this is the starting point for games and research. And yeah, I also started there with rock, paper, scissors. I don't compare myself to Alan Turing, but there are some similarities. Can we make a machine that plays rock, paper, and scissors? Engineering in games. The role of engineering is to apply scientific knowledge and to the development of solutions for empirical problems. And here we find the engineers of the early game history. I think Nolan Bushnell was maybe the boss, and Alan Alcorn was the engineer type who realized Pong, that was the first usable or that reached the mass market. And again, I don't compare with these guys, but this Eleanor console that we made, it was kind of engineering heavy, trying to make solutions that worked in practice. And by the way, I think we succeeded in that we actually got clinical studies showing that they improved their motions. But then we were not businessmen enough to make it into a product. That's another story. We didn't have any Nolan Bushnell, we only had the Alcon type. Designing games. The role of design is to produce embodiments of solutions that maximize function and augment human experience. It converts utility in behavior. Yeah. And then we go into the era where games started to have some stronger content and a little bit higher ambition on the type of content. Miyamoto came from manga tradition and wanted to tell a story in these games. Again, no comparisons, but the Marvinter project that we did was more towards this. At least for myself, I got in contact with much more of these elements. And then we get to art. The role of art is to question human behavior and create awareness of the world around us and convert behavior into new perceptions of information, representing the data that initiated the cases insights. And art is debated with games. This was when I had the class with master students, this was the most infected topic when I said that there are researchers claiming that games can never be art. It was really provocative. And I'm not an artist, I haven't done art, but I put this tool projects in the art part because I think this the support to express things and to create things driven by your artistic ambition is heavily depending on the types of tools you can provide to make it. It's possible to be an artist if you're on top of everything and can control your team and so on. But I think it's much more complicated than if I think we saw it with vad heter det som man gör interaktiva typ twine? It is fine.
Oh, that's fine.
Twine.
Oh.
Twine. Writing tool that was so easy to use. A lot of people started to express themselves through the tool, and some people say, "Oh, yeah, but is it really games?" and so on, and you get a debate on that. But I mean, the tool and the creation is closely connected. So that's the KCC that involves the whole big picture, as I think, and the people at the MIT Media Lab also have this attitude that if we should create interesting stuff, we can't get too stuck in our disciplines. We need to see the big thing. And one thing that I cover in the book is the literature review that we made and trying to look for game research. And this is the SCOPUS database of research papers, and the parts per million that has game in the title abstract search. And it's clearly a huge increase in interests from 2000. And if we look at the type of research, we see that there's a huge interest in gamification, serious games, entertainment, and things like that. I think it's a bit ridiculous to see the gamification path here. And it reflects some of the problems we have in academia with like buzzword hunting, and you apply for money, you should put the right buzzwords there. And the game development, the yellow one, is much more modest. And then after we made the big literature reviews, I filtered out the studies that had actually been going to the game studios, talking to actual developers or being part of the team in some way, and try to present that part that remained. And this is the structure of the book. I try to make some kind of picture of the areas and how the chapters relate. And I don't think this is the only way to do it. You can always say, oh, there's a close connection with this and that and so on. So it should be taken for what it is. But there are like 4 major clouds here. One is more IT, software engineering oriented. One is more towards social science, game studies. One is on media oriented studies, and then business management, analytics, publishing in the middle. And serious games is on its own. And I won't say so much about serious games, but I've been working a lot with serious games. So I think I know what I'm talking about when I say it's quite different from regular game development. It's possible for game studios to make a serious games by themselves, and then it becomes more similar. But I think the most common version is the one to the left, where there is some kind of client or user organization that is going to use this game in some kind of organizational context, while a game developing organization is doing the game for players that are quite close to them in many ways. They are represented in the studio in many ways, and that could be criticized that they make games for themselves and so on. But it's not that they need to understand the needs of some other. And also there are very few successful examples of serious games. But regular games is a huge industry, and in Sweden we have had very little support for that very successful industry. So if I should say something about the research in the wild, one thing is a general lack of studies. It's not much, and the area that has the best integration between research and the development is the games research and user experience people. And then some other areas that have relatively good representation. Management, research, there's quite a lot, software engineer a lot, I would say. And then some people from the game studies community doing production studies that are close to companies. But then there are some areas where there's very, very little. Anything that has to do with the art, animation and those things, music, audio, almost nothing. And surprisingly also narrative and writing. So, and when I presented the research, I think it's important to make a distinction between research that is conducted in the wild, but with a very disciplinary focus, trying to investigate how my focus area is handled in the game company, compared to studies which wants to understand game development as an activity in its own right. And then I also think it's a difference, and this is a classical applied, non-applied. If it's mainly observing studios, talking to studios, or if it's applied development experience, like design science research, where you are part of the process and develop things. So this is a spectrum, and I made some illustrations to show it. This is like the developer talking to the programmer. This is some researcher developing a very isolated part of something. A researcher talking to a studio, or a researcher being part of the studio. And as I said, the game user research, or games research and user experience, the GRUX, have managed to tighten the gap. And one thing is that the industry recruits researchers, and then these people continue to publish and do research on the practice. One thing, though, is that I haven't found any people doing applied interaction design. The industry combines these two, I think. Like games user research and the interaction design is closely connected, but in the research literature, I haven't found any talking about the actual creation. It's more evaluation. And from one of these studies, I took this quote: "One reason for the lack of tailored techniques which could be applied to all stages of game development is that the game development process itself is not known in detail to the HCI community." Yeah, I'm talking about human-computer interaction. And I would say it's not known to many communities at all. But one problem, or one difference with the GRUX people is that the GRUX team should or can be external to the studios or the dev teams. And for good reasons. I think I had a quote there. To help researchers resist the groupthink that often happens when all the game development team members are completely immersed in game development on a single title. So in order to do a good job to evaluate, you shouldn't be part of the thing, building the thing. So there we have a little bit of a distinction with the game user research academics, because many times they are already outside the team. Going to the software engineers, there's a lot of studies on agile development methods, and it's very focused on rational technological perspectives. And I would argue that other disciplines are not well understood. It's like software engineer researchers talking to the tech part of the company. And then we find things. Yeah, this is actually a really good paper. I recommend to anybody working with software engineering or programming oriented. It's called, the title has cowboys in it. It's Cowboy Coders. So I call it the cowboy paper. It's a study where they interview developers at Microsoft that has worked on game titles and non-game titles about the differences between the two, which I think is super interesting. And this is a quote from here. We got so many specialists on the team, so the kind of planning that you usually do in Agile doesn't work quite so well. You know, specialists, I think, like artists and so on, and designers, are more concerned about the creative process than an engineering process. And I think they captured this really well in this. Okay. Here's another quote. A particular problem in game development is the integration of disciplines from non-engineering domain like graphic design, since their unstructured, opportunistic workflow differs considerably from the conservative approaches in engineering. Yes. And I think it illustrates that there are challenges. And this is another example about it. I think it's quite well documented that engineering and art fights in industry. So it's not easy. And we will do the same in academia, for sure. So this is a quote: there's always conflict between art and engineering. They want tools to work this way. They want to do the minimum work possible. And sometimes we can make that happen by spending a lot of engineering time developing some nice, neat tool for them. It's purely resource-based, so we can save the art team time by spending engineering time and vice versa. I don't think this company has a very good management, but an example of some interesting studies. AI, computer graphics and those technical areas, I think surprisingly few studies go to the game studios. They develop like new rendering techniques for its own sake, and then it's picked up by the industry if it's good, and that's the workflow. In AI, I found an interesting study from EA, I think. AI people from EA talk about the sophistication gap. AI academics and game engineers once found themselves separated by sophistication gap. High potential academic techniques on one side and scripting and other skill, but practical engineering techniques on the other. I don't know if it got better, but I think it's visible in many areas that researchers want to do super sophisticated stuff, and it's very hard to apply it in practice because there are other aspects that needs to be considered. It's a little bit the Stupra's thinking that we have here. That for us it's super interesting if it's new and novel, but maybe it's too hard to use. Game studies community, I make this picture of saying that here it's a focus on the game, the player, the culture surrounding on playing, and if development is considered, it's as design, and many times as a solitary activity to be a designer. It's not so much focused on the team. There are exceptions, but this is the typical picture. And Jennifer Whitson wrote something that I think many game studies scholars recognize. We enter the field by writing about games and gamers, but as a condition of employment, we're increasingly asked to become theorist practitioners and teach others to make games. And and there we are back to this separation. But she's in an area that could be called game production studies. Studio studies is another term used. Studio studies, I'm no expert, but I think the idea is that you study the studio as the creative unit, and you can make comparison with different types of studios where creativity is important, and it sounds really relevant for game development. Some names in this area are John Banks, Casey O'Donnell. Casey O'Donnell has written a book called Developer's Dilemma. I think that's one of the few really closely to industry publications. And Jennifer Whitson, she's super. And one of the papers she's been in to look at the indie teams and the missing producer. The issue with replacing the missing producer with the indie entrepreneur is that entrepreneurship frameworks are too narrowly equated to marketing and biz dev, and often exist in tension with developers' own goals and conceptions of good work. In other words, in embracing cultural entrepreneurship, developers must become the very things they rejected in the mainstream industry. And we have exactly that in our incubator environment, where we have entrepreneurs. I mean, the whole idea with an incubator is to make money, but the indie people are not always there to make money. They're there to make games that eventually can make money. And there's a clash there. Which brings us to the management research. And I would say that this is the most holistic research on game developments. They are limited to management perspective, and I talk to producers and the leading roles, which means they are not focusing on other parts of the production, but those people they talk to, they themselves in general have a very good perspective on the production. And there's quite a lot of AAA studies where they've had access to AAA studios. Some are super interesting, and one problem that is talked about a lot is that studios want to give you access, but apparently some have managed to get really good access, at least in Canada. And one early management scholar in this is Baba maybe, but Chang has done a lot in this. Software has traditionally been seen as an efficiently driven process, but in innovative software there are other important issues, such as the need to allow for radical redesign in development cycles and the need to resolve tension between creative and controlling processes. We talked about this 2001, so it has been around for a long time. Yeah, the producer is a keynote. Project manager has to learn the culture, ethos, and even jargon of each profession involved in the project. This let us think that curiosity and a strong interest for discovery lies at the heart of the project manager job, in parallel with strong skills in listening and learning. So this literature is, I think, is quite interesting to look at for game dev students. And one thing, if you're in the computer science department, there are some interesting observations about the problems with agile. This is Hodgson and Bryan. Given the current vogue for the adaptation of agile and similar methodologies, there's a pressing need for more extensive cross-sectoral and critical research into its implementation and the consequences for control, which I think is very true. And then the odd one out, the business research, which is it's an outsider. I think it's really incompatible with the game studies community. I think like in game studies, it's no problem to talk about Marxist studies and things like that. And in business, it's political economy, maybe you do it, but in the like mainstream business, it's money making, and it's rarely focused on development aspects. It's mostly on higher levels, looking at businesses and the corporates and so on. One thing it shares with GRUX is the analytics, the use of analytics in business intelligence is a thing. And that intelligence can also be used for design intelligence. So there's some overlap there. Yeah, and here I put the CEO as the research contact. I've found some interesting studies where they really try to understand how our indie developers think. And realize the similar thing as before, that they're not so much into money. many cases, the business side of video game development was treated as a necessary evil that needs to be contained within the broader professional commitments to video game development. I think this is some Swedish researchers that talk to indie developers, and it's not surprising if you know indie companies that this is the case, but this is a surprise to the business people, I think. Yeah, analytics. We have a PhD student who has background in publishing, who is talking to indie studios about analytics and publishing and so on. And with the free, in this research, it's almost only free-to-play analytics and publishing activities. And there's a sophistication gap here, as it was with AI. This is a Finnish study where they talk to companies about analytics, and overall our study portrays a different picture of game analytics than the prior research that has listed numerous opportunities and introduced sophisticated technology solutions for analyzing gameplay data. They are very, very primitive in the way they use the analytics. So the white spots on the research map. This was the strong sides. Art, audio, writing, almost nothing. I have some examples of things that I found that I think shows that there are reasons to study these areas, and yeah, we need to go there. This was a study, an interview study with no, sorry, this is O'Donnell, Developer's Dilemmas, one of his studies published in the Convergence journal. And the convergence is a big thing in some media people's discussions about how things can flow freely between different formats and so on. And he studied a game company working on the Spider-Man 3 game, and argues quite strongly about the non-convergence between formats. Games are quite different from film, music, television, and the myriad of other media industries interested in flowing content to video game players. What gamers and game developers have long been aware of, and many executives and decision makers in other creative industries have not yet come to understand, is that games are complex information systems. And personally, I think it's very, very hard to communicate this. If you have no background in IT, you have very, very hard time to understand what implications of interactivity and IT development is. So we experienced this in our project with Swedish Radio. We really tried to communicate that we need to do tests and play tests and things. We need to finish this early, while they had in their previous production, they did the last editing of the episode in December. So the last half of the advent calendar was made during December. And we said, yeah, we can't do that. We need to release the whole game at the latest November 30. But yeah, you don't. Yeah, it was very hard to communicate that. Music. Yeah, this was a music study. This was an interview with some composers to AAA games, and I found it really interesting to see this very alien role they had in the game production. So they talked about that they felt they were alone. It's only me making this, but at the same time they expressed things like this: I couldn't be more involved in integrating music, at least make suggestions on how music can be used. To some extent, if you're hired to write 60 or even 100 minutes of music in a game that lasts 16 or 20 hours, they're going to reuse your music. So the composer was like concerned about the way that things played out when it was interactive, but a little bit too far away. And I was thinking, yeah, this also relates to the tools we talked about. But he was like, no more tools. We have too many tools. But I suspect they were talking about music composing tools and things like that, not the interactivity part. But I think that you can make connections to the writing tool I talked about. Like you can make a playthrough, you can listen to it with music, but you need to listen to many other possible branchings of the events and the music score and so on. But I don't think they have that. Actually, I think some of them here said that they've never played the games they composed. They watch YouTube streams. Interesting. Game writing, a few, and Linderoth is one of the few that has done a study talking to studios about development and writing as one part, and he concludes that informants treat storytelling as a natural part of game development. However, storytelling is not seen as being at the core of the product, which can be provocative to some researchers. But it obviously depends on which company you talk to. In the GRUX literature, I found the most interesting study in the wild relating to narratives by the Microsoft GRUX team. And they talked about how they realized that the testing of the narrative came too late because they had to wait for the whole game to be produced before they can take the narrative, test the narrative experience. And they also discovered that the people were not reacting to the narrative in the same way as we do with movies. They couldn't retell the narrative of the game and so on. So they started to create new practices for testing the narrative. Yeah, this is a quote. Designers wanted players to fall in love with the world, to love and mourn characters were lost, to feel a sense of risk and challenge that motivates gameplay, and to come away feeling as though they had accomplished something grand. Unfortunately, game narratives don't always deliver on these goals for players. So I strongly recommend this book chapter. It's super interesting. So that was a brief summary of the research in the wild from the book. Some remarks. It's surprising how much we have up in the north when it comes to this. It's Canada, Finland, Sweden that are like the main countries. But then, of course, we only looked at the English literature. But yeah, the north has something here. So my conclusions, few focus on game development in the wild, and not all has focus on game development. And I think as game development is the art of making compromises, it's a dangerous track to optimize on one thing. I think you always need to have the compromise there to understand it well. Yeah, I think this game development focus is needed much more in many areas. Then, of course, if you develop a super efficient rendering solution, you don't need to understand all the details about the other parts, but in many cases the big picture is needed. And then we can. I had this discussion with I think Jonas Linderoth. He was very strong on that. You can't be a game scholar unless you play games. If you want to study games and gaming, you need to play games, fair and square. But then I applied it to: do you need to develop interdisciplinary teams to study game development? I think it's a similar comparison, because I think you can study gaming by just interviewing the players. It's fully possible. maybe you can't analyze the game using some methods, but you can observe gaming as an outsider, and you can observe game development as an outsider. But I think it contributes to understanding, to be part of an interdisciplinary team, and to see as a programmer the way artists name their files and all those things that you can't imagine, and vice versa. And our students get it in our projects. They work together and they learn a lot from working together, but we don't do it. And there's nothing in the system that forces us to go together. You get promoted if you do research. It's easier to do research in one discipline deep than to try to bring in many perspectives in our academic system. Yeah, I think I have my last slide there. So.